begin the proceedings. So, good evening, everybody. And on behalf of Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research, faculty and my colleagues, it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this first Professor Yoginder Alagh Memorial Lecture. And I must admit that we began a little late, but now I think we are going to make it a regular feature. And thanks to the persuasion of all my senior colleagues in Institute of Human Development as well as Tavishi, we have reached this stage that we can now, and I really welcome everybody to the event. So this lecture is being initiated by our institute to honor the memory of Professor Alagh. He was India's one of the most distinguished economists, institution builder, and public intellectuals. Equally respected as an academic, policymaker, administrator, and educator, he played a significant role in shaping India's development discourse. I would just briefly like to mention that he was born in undivided Punjab, and Professor Alagh studied at the University of Rajasthan before earning his doctorate from University of Pennsylvania. Returning to India in the late 1960s, he joined the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and thereby began a very distinguished academic and public career. Over the decades, he held several important positions, including Vice Chancellor of JNU, Union Minister of State for Power, Science and Technology, Planning and Program Implementation, Chancellor of the Central University of Gujarat. He also served as a founder Chancellor of Guru Angad Dev Veterinary and Animal Sciences University. He headed numerous institutions and commissions, several in ICSSR institutions amongst them also. He acted as an expert with a number of UN organizations. He was consultant and senior advisor to UNESCO, FAO, UNDP, ILO, World Bank, ADP, WIDER, CIGI in Waterloo. He had also a very distinguished career in the government of India. He was chairman of the Agricultural Prices Commission, Bureau of Industrial Cost and Prices, in the rank of secretary to the government of India. But most of all, Professor Alagh was known for his very empathetic leadership and ability to engage very sympathetically with students, young researchers and colleagues alike, and all of us are beneficiaries of that interaction and constant encouragement coming from Professor Alagh. He made several landmark contributions to India's economic planning and policy framework. Most notably, he chaired the 1979 Planning Commission task force that formulated the poverty lines for rural and urban India based on nutrition norms. He also played a very key role in developing the well-known Alagh formula for the devolution of funds to states, which was later adopted by the subsequent finance commissions. His contributions extended to India's 7th five-year plan and long-term perspective plan of 1985-2000 till 2000, while his work on industrial policy, agricultural economics, rural development, and the informal sector was very significant. He served on the planning board for the Sardar Sarovar project, and I think Gujarat has benefited immensely from his planning contributions and the development of the economic and the agriculture sector. He initiated reforms for the decontrol of steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers, and helped establish the econometric cell of the Agricultural Service Commission. In the 2000s, he chaired a committee whose recommendations paved the way for recognizing farmer cooperatives as producer businesses. So I think while he was in IRMA, this was a very seminal contribution that Sir had made. Professor Alagh shared a particularly enduring relationship and association with the Sardar Patel Institute. He was the director of the institute from 81 to 92, and he shaped SPIESR as a notable center for policy-oriented research. Under his leadership, the institute developed strong expertise in regional economics, agricultural policy, industrial development, and energy economics, and contributed significantly to the understanding of Gujarat and India's economic transformation. He set up the Central Support Cell for the Agroclimatic Regional Planning at Sardar Patel Institute, which was a pioneering effort at decentralized planning for agriculture. Even after his tenure, he remained closely associated with the institute and was our guiding force and mentor to all of us. His legacy remains integral to SPIESR's identity and intellectual tradition. Through his scholarship, institution building, and public service, Professor Alagh exemplified the role of a people's economist. And we all really hope and pray that he be in peace wherever he is and continues to bless us and guide us. We are indeed very fortunate to have with us Shri Nitin Desai, currently the chair of the Governing Council of the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, New Delhi. It is with immense pleasure and privilege that I introduce you to our distinguished speaker. Shri Desai is a national and international civil servant and a global advocate for sustainable development. After teaching at several UK universities and serving briefly as an economic consultant, he began his public service career with the Planning Commission in 1973. He served in the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and went on to become Secretary and Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Finance. His noteworthy work in Government of India was the establishment of a system of cost-benefit appraisal of public investment projects. He was also involved in energy policy work and was a member secretary of the National Commission on the Development of Backward Areas too. At the international level, he was a senior advisor to the Brundtland Commission, and all of us associated with environmental economics know how important that has been for our common future, where he introduced the concept of sustainable development. He joined the UN in 1990 as Deputy Secretary General of Development and was appointed as Under Secretary General of the UN in New York in 1993 and stayed in that post till 2003. During this period, he led the work on sustainable development and in other economic and social areas. And his major contributions included the organization of a series of global summits, notably the Rio Earth Summit, the Copenhagen Social Development Summit, the Monterey Finance and Development Summit, and the Johannesburg Sustainable Development Summit in 2002. After his retirement, Shri Desai was appointed as Special Advisor to the Secretary General of the UN on Internet Governance, and in that capacity chaired the group which organized the annual Internet Governance Forum, a position he occupied till 2010. In July 2004, Shri Desai was inducted as an honorary fellow of the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has been involved in a variety of public policy activities nationally and internationally, and writes a monthly column in a daily newspaper, The Business Standard. We are truly honored, sir, to have you with us today in this inaugural lecture series to honor Professor Alagh's memory, and look forward to hearing your views on the topic of policy priorities in a changing world. We also have on the dais Professor Ravi Srivastava, who is chairing today's deliberations. Professor Srivastava is the Director, Center for Employment Studies at the Institute of Human Development, New Delhi. He was till recently Professor of Economics and Chairperson at the Center for the Study of Regional Development, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was member of the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector in the rank of Secretary, Government of India. His main areas of research and publications include labor and employment, migration, social protection, agriculture, rural development, informal sector, regional development, decentralization, human development. And as PhD scholars, we have all gone through the process of reading his works in most of these related areas and using them as very important research material for our endeavors. He has been the chairman of the Institute of Development Studies, chairperson of a number of committees of the setup, such as the UGC, Planning Commission, member of ICSSR Governing Council. He has been part of the governing boards, academic councils, and executive councils of a number of universities and institutions. He was a consultant and advisor for Planning Commission, several state governments, as well as the central ministries, and several international bodies, such as the World Bank, ILO, ADB, UNDP, UNICEF, UNESCO, UNFPA, IFAD, FAO, DFID, and CETA, and numerous other such government and non-governmental agencies. He is also the past president of the Indian Society of Labour Economics and currently the president of the UP and Uttarakhand Economic Association. Sir, it is a privilege to have you with us today. I would now request Professor Srivastava to take over and moderate the proceedings. But before that, I would like to invite Ms. Tavishi Alagh to share her thoughts about Professor Alagh and his association with Ahmedabad and our institute, as only a daughter can. Tavishi.
Welcome, and I hope I'm not too loud. Welcome, and thank you all for coming out on this hot summer day. Thanks especially to Shri Nitin Desai, Professor Ravi Srivastav, who came in from Delhi. Thank you very much, sirs. And I want to particularly thank Shri Atul Sarma, Shri Alagh Sharma, and Niti ma'am for launching this series. People knew my father by many names. He was Dr. Alagh, Professor Alagh, Vice Chancellor Alagh, Mantri ji, Sahib, Alagh Sahib. But to me, he was dad, buddy, and best advisor anytime I was in a crunch. And I think he had a profound impact across all these roles. That, I think, was a function of the principles by which he lived his life, whether as a father or a professor or an economist or a policymaker. Those principles are the reason he continues to inspire me. They, I think, are the reason that you're all here today. He was a gold medalist in his MA, and his good Punjabi family expected him to get into the civil services or some prestigious career path like that. But off he went to do a PhD in economics from the US, which to them was not at all a sure shot. And in the same way, in the same forward thinking, always willing to challenge manner, challenge convention, he, born in a Punjabi family, married a Gujarati woman at a time when most men of his generation sort of settled down with someone from their own community. You know, my dad fell in love with a very independent thinking Gujarati woman and insisted on following his heart. That same thinking made him a policymaker who thought outside the box and then with tenacity and perseverance pushed through his goals. For me, it played out in the way in which he treated me as his daughter. This is something I remember, but also something that I'm told very often. When my brother was born, my dad's greatest concern was that I should not be left behind. He was worried that a beta aa gaya hai, so everyone's going to make much of the son and forget his daughter. He certainly did not. He pushed me to think for myself and then stand up for that thinking, no matter who was in the room. And that's been a huge boon to me in my career. It's this larger, there was this larger concern in him for gender equality, but it was not just a concept to be followed at like seminars or whatever. He really believed that each last man, woman, child should get enough to realize their fullest potential. More than anything, he didn't do anything by half measure. It wasn't enough for him to just marry a Gujarati. He had to embrace Gujarat. He became fluent in the language with an accent, which was a little embarrassing for us at times. He loved the food. He knew all its nuances, everything from amba aldar to, like little things he knew. And he became very well versed in the culture. A lot of people in Delhi would be really surprised when I tell them that he's a Punjabi. They'd be, really? Isn't Dr. Alagh a Gujju? And I was like, no, he's a Punjabi. He made Ahmedabad his home and the place we always returned to as a family. Wherever we went in the world, it was always back to Ahmedabad, which is why I'm really glad that we're starting this series in Ahmedabad. Niti ji has not mentioned this, but we are hoping that the series will alternate between Delhi and Ahmedabad. So 1 year in Delhi and 1 year in Ahmedabad. And I think that's appropriate. These two cities form the stage for his personal and professional life. Delhi was the gateway to professional opportunities, but Ahmedabad was always home. It is where he returned after he retired. Even in his retirement, his work was ongoing. My dad died very much in mid-stride with work which is incomplete. And I hope this series allows us to continue some of what he wanted to speak about, some of those issues. The Sardar Patel Institute has a very, very special place in his life and in his heart. And we had a video actually, which recounts his earliest memories of coming to Ahmedabad and starting with the institute. Due to some technical glitches, we are not showing it here, but we hope to post it on our Facebook page really soon. And hopefully we'll see you all as friends on the internet and outside. Thank you so much. Shri Nitin Desai.
Before I request Professor Srivastava to take over the proceedings, I would like to, on behalf of the Institute, welcome Shri Nitin Desai with a bouquet of flowers. And I would request my colleague, Forum, to present the same. I would also request Forum to give a welcome bouquet to Professor Srivastava.
I only need to say that it's a great privilege and an honor to be here in this first memorial lecture for Professor Yoginder Alagh. I'll have more occasion to say a little more about him after we have heard Professor Nitin Desai, whom we are all anxiously waiting to listen to. Professor Desai again is something, someone I would love to talk about, but again, maybe we'll have a little bit more time. So first, let's listen to him. Professor Desai, can I now request you to? I'll go up.
Thank you. Mr. Srivastava, Davishiala, and Niti Mehta, and all of the friends who have assembled here. I am really honored and delighted to have been asked to speak on the first memorial lecture for my friend Yoginder Alagh. We had known each other for about over 50 years and had a lot of connection between the families because of the hospitality and friendliness of not just Yoginder Alagh, but his wife Raksha, his daughter Tabishi, his son Munish, who's sitting there. And in many ways, therefore, you'll have to forgive me now and then I will refer to Dr. Alagh as Yoginder, because that's how I always knew him, as Yoginder, not just as Dr. Y.K. Alagh. You have heard a lot about the work that he has done. There's a formidable list which they have put out, which shows all the work that he's done in terms of things he has led, what he has written, etc., etc. And it's true that I think he was somebody who really valued his work as an institution leader of the Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research, of the Institute for Rural Management in Anand, the Institute of Human Development, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and you can draw a long list. He really he was somebody who did devote himself sufficiently in institution building. He was also an academic. My connection with him was not as an academic. He called me professor. I've never been a professor, but I've been a bureaucrat most of my life. But he was somebody I connected with more in the work we did in government. But one thing I always noticed was that Yoginder always prided himself on his academic work. Even when he was working in the government, what he would talk about is his academic work, always. And this is what he was very, very fond of, and particularly in his retirement. I saw some of the books that he had written recently about agriculture, which was recently published. And his focus was so much on connecting it to the academic side, and not just on the basis of his experience, which he had. He had extensive experience of policy making. As somebody mentioned out to you, he headed the institute which was involved in manufacturing, BICP, the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices, which doesn't exist any longer, it's been wound up, and the Agriculture Price Bureau, which is also something that he had chaired. So he was involved both on the manufacturing side and on the agriculture side. I'm mentioning this because later, when I talk of the substantive part, which I'm required to, I will be focusing on these are the two areas where we need to do different work. he joined the Planning Commission in 1974, I think, and I was there from 73. And we became very good friends. And the one thing that I will mention is that his room was the place where we always met for lunch, every working day. And there are several people here who have joined us for that lunch. I'm not sure, I think there are more than one who have joined us there for that lunch. And this was part of his hospitality and so on. But he did also contribute a great deal on the policy making, which was done in government. One thing that was mentioned, which was very useful, was the thing that he chaired, which defined poverty. Now, the other thing that I would mention is what the openness of Yoginder is that though he had chaired the committee which defined poverty, later, when he thought that was not enough, he himself argued against it and said, rework this. That is the difference, that he was not somebody who was completely caught up in defending anything that he had advised the government to do. And there are other areas that he also did a great deal of work, which I will not fully elaborate. And in many ways, what I will be talking about is what he would have done had he been in government today, which is what is it that the government needs to do in terms of its own development policy making in the situation which confronts them now. This is the basic theme of what I wish to talk about now. Because in many ways, what we're facing is a changing world, a very desperately changing world in some ways. And we have an immediate problem, which is connected with the Gulf area, the war which is going on in the Gulf area. And recently, the Prime Minister, in a speech at The Hague, I'm quoting him, "If this situation doesn't change soon, the achievements of past decades could be lost. A large portion of the world's population could once again fall into poverty." That was the decision that he made. And what he has called for is significant austerity by people in India. This is where he made a whole list of things: reduce cooking oil consumption, reduce chemical fertilizer use, reduce energy demand, shift from imported to domestic products, stop or limit gold purchase, and discretionary foreign travel and things of this sort. Now, of course, I will not say much on this, but I will argue that relying on people's austerity and people's doing things differently is not enough if the government doesn't do something. Now, it's not enough for the government to say, okay, we are going to travel by with the metro to get into shop. And that's not what is going to save the country. And for instance, on pricing, the cost of oil has gone up by 50% from around $79 a barrel before in February to about 107 now. The price has gone up by 5%. Now, that's not good enough. So I think we need an approach to development which takes into account the fact that we're living in a market economy and that the impact of what happens depends on what happens in the market. But I'm not really going to say much about the immediate challenge which arises because of the Gulf War. Our real challenge is a longer term one which is emerging from this. With the, not just the rising costs of oil, gas, etc. that we face, but the fact that in many ways the system of depoliticized global inter-country connections and trade, etc., is now changed. What we have in reality today is a system which is highly politicized in many ways. It's started by the United States, but it's not just that. You're now in a situation where you really have the bilateral agreements with everybody. There's no point in relying on what are the multilateral rules require you to do, etc. The very fact that you today have differential interest tax tariffs with different countries is itself a departure from the most favored nation rule which was there in the WTO. The fact that you have different rates for different countries, which is the reality today in India. The depoliticized global system has now given way to a highly politicized global system. And given what is happening in the global economy and geopolitics, the change is required because the politicization of trade and finance and the movement of even finance, etc., is going to be something which will require bilateral relationships with people. We are moving back to a pre-UN situation. Given this growing uncertainties which we face in the global geopolitical system, what is it that we should be focusing attention on? In fact, this is something I was happy to see was anticipated by the Ministry of Finance. Well, not quite by the Ministry of Finance, but by the Chief Economic Advisor. In the economic survey of 25-26, which was released, do look at chapter 16 in that survey. Because in that survey, he spells out, in fact, I'll quote the main point that he makes. In a world characterized by geopolitical fragmentation, strategic trade, volatile capital flows, and rapid technological disruption, the central constraint is no longer macroeconomic management alone. It is the depth and quality of state capacity. And he then elaborates this in a very elaborate extent. And this is what I think we need to address. I want to add one more thing to why we need to address. In many ways, we had a very successful country in the post-liberalization period since 1991. And there's no doubt that one can accept that there were significant changes which took place. There were remarkable changes in 1991, not just the removal of industrial licensing. I think there are other things which are important. The changes that were made on foreign trade, tariffs being brought down, the exchange rate being adjusted. What I thought was even more important that has happened since in that period is the way in which the finance system was modified. Remember this, that we are all used to private banks and private mutual funds. They didn't exist before 91. They didn't exist when I was a chief economic advisor, I can tell you that much. But they are the ones who are making a big difference. If you see the reality of what has happened in this post-liberalization period, a great deal is due to this freeing up of the finance system and allowing much greater private participation in banks and in mutual funds. We also see this in the share market. The share market, the Sensex was 1,000 in 1991. Now it's fallen a little, but it's still 75,000. And there's a huge difference which has come. Apart from that, the value of shares as a percentage of GDP has also gone up enormously. But in this system, in this liberalization that we had, I should have been using some. I forgot that I've got things there. That was, of course. Oh, it works. Oh. Let me move on. And in a way, if I look ahead at the trend over the 90s, one thing that I would point out is that if you look at, say, this is the economic growth rate. And if you look at the growth rates, yes, they did go up slightly. The average is still around 6%. There was a high growth between 2004 and 2011. But it has gone back into 6% now. That's not the most crucial problem. We also saw this huge change in who's responsible for investment. In the pre-1991 days, it was largely the public sector. The share of the private corporate sector in investment relative to the public sector was pretty low, as you can see down there. And then it has shot up. In fact, it reached twice the public sector investment at its peak in the high period of 2007, 2008. Even now, it is higher. It's about 1.5 times, a little more, 1.33 times what public sector investment is. This is a crucial development which has taken place. I'm good. Since I can't see those things, I'll take out.
If you don't want to use the slide, it is okay.
Are you sure?
It's a distraction. We can listen to you.
Can listen to me fine. But the numbers that I'm talking about, that's why I need to have. I can't list all the numbers as I go along. It used to be 1991, 45% was the share between the private sector's investment was 45% of what the public sector investment is. The share of the private sector, corporate sector shot up like anything. And in that high period of 2004 to 2010, when we had this real boost of the corporate sector, at one time it was twice the private sector's investment. Then it has come down a little. And right now it's about 1.33. On the trade system, there was a huge change. If you see the trade system, and how the relative growth of, but let me focus on the export side. This is the way in which the share of exports in GDP shot up. This is one major change which took place after 1991, and how India became a country which was a major player in global trade. And this is what you see of the share of trade, exports as a percentage of national income. The other thing that changed in those periods is foreign investment flows. These are the amount of foreign investment flows that you had after the opening up of the system in 1990-91. Now, the reason I'm picking on these three things, the share of the private sector in investment, the share of exports in GDP, and what's happening to foreign DI, this is one of the reasons for looking at new policy, because this is coming down. Foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP has dropped to virtual zero now, because the outflows have increased. And remember this, 1/3 of the outflows are by Indians and 2/3 are by foreigners. And because of that, the FDI, you can see the last bit of FDI is way down at the bottom. Exports. Manufacturing exports as a percentage of GDP have remained static, around 12%. It has not gone up at all in any ways. Private sector investment has declined. It has gone down from, it is about 1.33 times public sector investment. But one of the things that I think is widely accepted now is a certain lack of willingness to invest in the private sector. So point I would make is that the reason we need development policy change is not just the Gulf War, not just the politicization which is coming from the USA, but to recognize that in certain areas we have not been successful enough in ensuring growth. I mean, in any comparison of what India has gone in manufacturing, what China has done in manufacturing makes this more than obvious at all times. So this is the reason why we ought to be focusing on trying to get a new way of managing. Well, I focus very much on manufacturing. I'm also going to say a word on the agriculture side, but that's a different story, which I'll come to a little later. I'll just mention in passing, and we'll come to it. The problem in agriculture is that we have a policy which is based on a policy which was very good in the mid-60s, which was with support for paddy and wheat production with MSPs and so on. Now, that's not your problem today. You have, in fact, a gross surplus of paddy and wheat production. And we must understand that the paddy and wheat production as a percentage of agricultural production is not that high. If I take all agricultural production and include milk also in it, the share of rice and wheat in production is 14%. So we have a very effective policy which looks after 14% of what agriculture production is. Who's looking after the rest? What is happening to the rest? The 86% is not really something which is being supported in a serious way by governments, and you get all sorts of challenges and issues. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Let me continue with this. Now, in the case, I focused on the totality. If I am now focused on the trends in manufacturing development, if you see the numbers, the share of manufacturing in GDP has come down. Our goal was 25%. But the reality is that it has come down from 17% 10 years ago to 14% now. As I said, our goal is 25, but we are actually getting only 14% is the share of manufacturing in I'm not sure how no, that's a minor thing which I wanted to mention, the growth of the private sector. This is how the employment in banking has moved. The blue thing is the decline in the share of the public sector, and the red one is the increase in the share of the private sector. And as you can see, private sector, the employment of banking in the private sector now exceeds the employment of banking in the public sector. And this is particularly, if you were to include the small banks, etc., in this, it will be even more. But that's a very minor thing. These are the trends in manufacturing which I really would talk about. This is what manufacturing trend as a percentage of GDP has been. It is hardly not just static, it has actually come down, as you can see, for the past 10 years. This is something we ought to note and recognize. This is the thing about the share of manufacturing in GDP, manufacturing value, the share of manufacturing in GDP, and then the next one, which is even more important, the share of manufacturing investment. And if you can see employment also, you'll see that there's very little growth in employment in the manufacturing. The substantial growth in employment in the infrastructure and a huge increase in employment in services. But the manufacturing employment is static. The reason I'm mentioning this is that these are not things which are simply attributable to what has happened in Gulf War or what America is doing. It is something which is something missing in the policies that we have followed in the post-91 system. And we need to address that part. How do we strengthen manufacturing? Now, this is a tougher area on about strengthening of manufacturing. I sometimes argue that entrepreneurship in India is very common. In the Mughal days, the government depended more on the entrepreneurs than the entrepreneurs on the government. That was the reality. And during the colonial era, despite the absence of government support, there was significant development of colonial development in textiles, in Tata Steel, or what the extraordinary things which Walchand Hirachand did when he set up the aircraft thing, they set up the other things. Our problem today is that we've got into a manufacturing sector which is becoming government dependent. This is the problem, that we have ended up with a manufacturing sector which has become excessively dependent on the government. There's nothing at all like the sort of freak enterprise sector we had in the colonial era, and so on. Our government policy also is business-oriented, not market-oriented. So the whole concept is of connectivity between the government and the particular company for some reason or the other. One can elaborate on that. And the major form of subsidy which the government gives is revenue foregone in corporate tax. That goes to established companies, not to new ones. It's quite large. It's about 10% of corporate tax collection is what we are giving away now. We had a time when the entrepreneurship was strongly controlled under the licensing system. That has gone. But you still have a degree of control exercised by the government on what people will invest in, partly because some of them are investing in infrastructure, which is subject to government control, and partly because of the government programs like PLI and so on, with the money that they give for specific companies for specific purposes. So the whole notion of promoting manufacturing has been tended to be this close connectivity between the government and the corporate sector. The other point that I would stress is that the power of the conglomerates in India is very strong. One big difference I noticed when I look at China and India, China's huge manufacturing growth came entirely from newcomers, because the old pre-communist Chinese companies are gone. Conglomerates were gone. And all the people who came up when Deng Xiaoping liberalized the system are all newcomers, mostly technologists. And this is a dimension we should keep in mind, that the huge growth that you see in manufacturing, which is today the largest manufacturer in the world, the largest exporter of manufacturing in the world, their exports are 20% of GDP, ours is 2% of total global manufacturing GDP. So this is the dimension that we should keep in mind, that really if you want fast manufacturing growth, it is not necessarily, you need not stop conglomerates, let them do that. But they are not the people who you should focus on in terms of government assistance. The government assistance should be focused very strongly on the new enterprises which are there. And this is not happening in India. We have a business-friendly government, but we do not have a market-friendly government. And we need to have a market-friendly government. If we want a fast growth of manufacturing, started off usually by and so there are other dimensions which you should keep in mind. There is a strong incentive in India not to grow because of the way the laws are defined. This is not there in the East Asia. So you must create a situation where there is no disincentive to becoming a large producer, which is that is what growth will come from. There are areas where this has happened. You take, for instance, the whole history of infosystem development in India, the Infosys, etc. They were all newcomers, except for Tata's in TCS. It was no conglomerate who got into that. They were individual technicians who got into the system and moved ahead very fast, which is why today you have one of the largest setups in your country is on this whole software side, on the infrastructure, on infotech side. And that was something which came in because there was a situation where, for a variety of reasons, new starters could start and grow, as they have done. Try and repeat that in other areas. Do not try and focus largely on people who are already established and how you can help them. So this is one thing that I would stress on manufacturing. The other thing is you will have to perhaps look a little bit more at the trade side. Now, here it is a bit connected with what is happening now. We are facing a situation in the world where there is a lot of, how shall I say, politicization of trade. Look at the way China refuses to give you rare earths or magnets. Look at the way the United States won't give you advanced chips and so on. So, and remember this, that in India, the dependence on imported inputs is huge. I saw a number the other day from Exim Bank, which argued that the exports-oriented manufacturing can have a requirement of imports which go up to 50–60%. Now, this is something which we need to address. Take one important example, pharmaceuticals. India is a major exporter of pharmaceuticals. That is certainly true. But all their starting points, the APIs, which they use for manufacturing stuff they export, comes from China. 39,000 crores is our import cost of the APIs that we get from China. Now, this is a dimension we have to perhaps address. Focus your trading support on things which will contribute to the addressing availability of things which are otherwise going to get politicized. And this we will have to do, and perhaps this has become an even more important issue with the sort of changes that we are experiencing now. But the big reason that I find missing in India is research and development in manufacturing. India's percentage of research and development to GDP is 0.6%. China's is 2.7%. China's, so it's 4 times ours. China's GDP is 4 times ours. So their thing is 16 times ours. But there's another big difference. 75% of China's research spending is by private corporate sectors. In India, it's only 30%, 35%. And much of it is not very reliable, the thing which is being done. So we will have to address this issue of how do I do this? How do I promote heavy research by the corporate sector? And this is where the earlier point I made of a manufacturing policy which is strongly focused on stimulating newcomers. This is happening. I saw one area where it is happening is in the space side. Most of the people who are getting involved in the space side are newcomers. They're newcomers. Now, they're not necessarily growing as fast, I must admit. They're still only starters and so on. So they're not really growing as rapidly as one would expect, but there's still newcomers who are coming in. So I would say that perhaps one of the things which would really stimulate research, particularly if we get into infotech side and so on, it would be to focus your attention on a market-friendly system which stimulates the startups by newcomers. And you may well find that the research thing in India will also go up. There are some signs of improvement in research in India. For instance, the number of Indian research reports which are quoted internationally has gone up. There are some signs of improvement which are taking place, but not yet enough in the manufacturing side. You must forgive me if I have a rather low opinion of our conglomerates. Look what our conglomerates are up to. Which high research thing are they getting into? They are more interested in setting up themselves up as retailers. Most of them are setting themselves as retailers. So don't count on conglomerates. In fact, one of the things I would also stress is that the conglomerates in America have reduced the coverage by half. It's happening in Europe. In our case, the conglomerates are expanding into areas which are not the traditional areas. One good example is the way they are all getting into retail trade. which was not their traditional area, but they're getting into this retail trade. So my point about manufacturing is don't just focus on the immediate problems that you have because of the Gulf War, because of what USA is up to. Keep in mind that you have not fully succeeded in the growth of the manufacturing sector through the liberalization that you started in 1991. Ask yourself what that is. And my argument is the main reason is we have not had a system which is market friendly enough to stimulate newcomers to move faster. So let me just stop on the manufacturing that side. My point on the agriculture side was a little different. What I've mentioned to you already, which I'll repeat now, which is that in many ways the structure of our agriculture has changed enormously. If you look, it's not just you look the value of, say, milk. In the gross value added of milk in GDP is larger than that of rice and wheat and cereals. Yes, look at the numbers. And if you see what those numbers are, you'll be surprised. Let me. Oh, I'm not succeeding in getting this to move. But anyhow, let me leave it at that. It's moved? Oh, too much. Move too fast. Anyhow, I'll just give you the numbers. Let me, I'm not too used to using these things. तो तो ठीक कर दिए. वो बता दूं मैं तुझे कहना नहीं था. 20 ये $2. What I've done is I'll show you a number which shows that the percentage growth in fruits and vegetables, in milk, in eggs, far exceeds the growth in production of rice and wheat. What you're talking of is 27% growth over the past decade, more than a decade, in rice and wheat. What you're talking of in other cases could be 100% growth, 50% growth, 60%. I'll show you the numbers as they comes up. So the point that we should understand is that if you are trying to support agriculture, it can't be just running an MSP system for rice and wheat. That's a minor part. It's actually, quite frankly, it has become a part for, on behalf of one class of farmers. So the other point that I would stress is that the answer to support from government is not just government buying and distributing things as they do with paddy and wheat. It could be cooperatives. Look at milk. Milk is a thing which has grown enormously in India, but it has never had an MSP run by government. No minimum support price. Yeah, these are just the number, what I've already said. So. Now, these are the things which I was telling you about the growth in price of the three things that I mentioned. Yeah, first like and what do we do? So yeah, that is. And the next one is just the growth rates, and you can see how the growth rates are essentially in things like milk, eggs, meat also has gone up a lot, but not rice and wheat. So we must look beyond this. And what we should look beyond, one thing I would mention here, unlike manufacturing where I kept on talking about market-oriented, market this thing, agriculture cannot be run entirely on a market-oriented system. If you see in agriculture, there's a huge difference in the marketing system in agriculture between manufacturing and in agriculture. If I were to look at it, in agriculture markets, there are lakhs of sellers and a limited number of wholesale buyers. In the case of manufacturing, it's the other way around. There are a limited number of sellers and a large number of wholesale buyers. But that's its exact opposite in the case of agriculture. The supply in agricultural markets is very seasonal. It comes just at one time. Whereas the use is throughout the year. That's not the case in manufacturing. The demand curve for agricultural products can be inelastic and very steep. And therefore, the prices tend to jump up and down. And we've noticed this in all of the products other than rice and wheat, that this fluctuation is there. So you can't run the system for agriculture on a free market basis. That's a reality which we'll have to accept. But we also can't run it simply as a government-run purchase and sale system. So what I've argued is that keep it as a three-part system, where you have some things where you do have a government-run procurement and distribution system, usually for something which requires guaranteed buying. Second, promote cooperatives. Look at the success of milk cooperatives that you've seen, certainly in Gujarat, but possibly also in certain other areas. Third, there will be some areas which will remain under private sector purchase and sale. And you have to have a system of ensuring that there is some degree of control over the legitimacy of what is being done in the private sector. So have all three systems. Second, divide it by region. Don't think of the same answer for every part of the country. In fact, Yoginder Alagh actually put out a proposal for eco-regions, 15 different eco-regions which were identified by him, and he proposed that, I'll show you the map, that's the one, which shows the 15 different regions which he had identified. So the way we should really approach it is to have a region-based system and decide within the region for what are you going to have government procurement and distribution, for what other things are you going to promote cooperatives, what are the things where you'll say leave it to the private sector, but we will just have some sort of supervisory site to make sure that they don't overexploit sellers and buyers. So this is something which has not been done. Second, we must look beyond just the product into a system which looks at the eco-region agriculture support, not just in terms of what do I do in order to manage the product purchase and sale, but also the input side, also the research side on the technologies that are being used in agriculture and so on. We need to go much beyond what we are doing and keep it regionalized. This means you'll have to rely much more on states. You can't do all this from a central government. A central energy ministry cannot, agriculture ministry cannot handle this variation in what we need across the 15 eco-regions and what we need for the different products. This is something which will have to be decided at the state level for each region. And in many ways, this decentralization of decisions is something which is a long way off. There are many other things that I could talk about, but I'm overshooting my time. And let me just say that one of the areas where I would, of course, stress is on the environment side. And in the case of agriculture, it has to be adaptive environment, because you're going to get a change in climate, you're going to get a change in heat, etc., which you cannot avoid. And this is going to seriously affect agriculture. So we need work which will focus on many things which we require to change in agriculture in terms of the type of products they use, the type of seeds they use, and so on. So there has to be a more focused work on addressing adaptation to climate change in agriculture. There are other areas in manufacturing, in urban areas and so on, where a great deal of work needs to be done on climate. There are many other things one could talk about. I have only focused on manufacturing and agriculture, but there are many other things where things are a little short of what is happening. Our energy, we've done good work in terms of promoting renewables, but we have not done good work on the distribution of energy. I mean, there is a huge problem of the state level distribution sectors. And we have not really done enough address that issue, that the distribution of electricity that we require now with renewables, etc., coming up, it has to be something substantially different. So there are issues like that. There's a great deal we need to do on education and health, where we are falling behind very badly. So I could go on in other areas or things where we need to change. But now I focused on these two, partly because these were the areas which he was very focused and concerned about. And I would say that I hope that SPIESR will continue to work in some of these areas, developed in different things. And the changes we need in development policy must look beyond the immediate challenges we have because of the Gulf War or because of USA into a longer term issue of the changes that we require because we have not succeeded in the past, or the changes we require because the future is going to change because of climate, or because of a much greater degree of urbanization in India. So let me just, doesn't work. Lastly. So let me just say that I have spoken a little bit on these areas, but the rethinking that we need on development policy must look a little beyond. We have succeeded in the post-90s situation in many ways. Yeah. Now this is what I really want to say. And I focused on all this because of Yoginder. And if Yoginder would have been here, he would have argued with me, certainly. But I've done this because this is exactly what he would have wanted me to do. And I'll leave it at that. So many thanks to all of you. Many thanks for asking me to speak to you on this first memorial lecture for a wonderful man, Yoginder Alagh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitin Bhai, for a wonderful lecture. It's a great start to the Yoginder Alagh Memorial Lecture Series, and we'll have more such lectures in the years to come. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here today, to be able to chair the first memorial lecture. Professor Alagh was somebody who was extremely close to my heart. All of you know and have, of course, today heard about his various accomplishments in the academic field and in the policy arena. But I think what I need to be able to convey to you, that wherever he was, whether in the Planning Commission or in various committees, various boards, in more personal interactions, Professor Alagh was always a larger-than-life figure, full of wit and humor, full of, as Nitin Bhai would say and has said, the tendency to enter into debates with people much younger than himself, in fact, all age groups. He was very, very friendly with them all. And at the same time, I had the honor of serving with him on a few board of managements for several years, particularly Giri Institute of Development Studies in Lucknow and the Institute for Human Development. And we always also saw the serious side of him, how he took governance of institutions seriously. And I'm sure those at Sardar Patel Institute would bear me out on that, and tried his best to put governance on a very, very strong wicket in these institutions. He and I had one thing in common, and I'll, basically narrate an anecdote for that. Both of us would go an extra mile to find the food we loved. So I remember once we were at a seminar which Atulda had organized in Arunachal, and I saw something in the local market which both he and I relished. And I was immediately detailed by Professor Alagh to find more of that so that he could take it with him to Ahmedabad, bring it back with him to Ahmedabad. And when I found what we were looking for, his eyes actually lit up. So he was very, very fond of some things which I mutually shared with him. He was always a person which the institutions that he worked with could rely upon. He went out there, he went out of his way to support institutions, to support initiatives, and so on. And in the policy sphere, of course, he was extremely innovative. Something which Nitin Bhai has already talked about, the whole question, for example, of agroclimatic zones, his approach to agriculture, his approach to poverty lines. Many of you would recall that he wrote a paper which I would say is still very prescient. It was a small monograph, not a very large monograph, which he wrote on urbanization, the hidden urbanization in India in 1985. Where he argued that the urbanization data that we gathered from the census was not very accurate, was not a very accurate depiction of the rate of urbanization in India. And he also pointed out to differences between Western and the rates of urbanization in Western and Southern India and the rates of urbanization in Eastern India. That paper is still prescient because I believe that he made a very, very strong point when you look at the rates of urbanization and talk about urbanization in India. So that was Yoginder Alagh, whether as a minister, whether as a member of the Planning Commission, whether on different institutions. I joined Jawaharlal Nehru University after he had demitted term as Vice Chancellor in the university, soon after he demitted term also. And the university was full of I'm sure you would, recall that period was full of anecdotes about Yoginder Alagh and the different way in which he handled issues in the university and issues around the university. Particularly the way he handled, student activism, because he would literally wade into the middle of the problem, so to say, and start interacting with students, just across, like friends. And very soon the students would also have forgotten that they were initially, trying to pose an antagonistic relationship between themselves and the administration. So that was his strength. He didn't see this kind of antagonism. He saw both of them serving the cause of JNU, all of them serving the cause of JNU, and he contributed very significantly to the culture of JNU and to its growth during the period that he was Vice Chancellor. So it's a great honor and privilege for me to be here and to remember him once again. Thank you so much. Nitin Bhai, you've all heard. He is, of course, he's been the linchpin of the work on sustainability globally. And the Brundtland Commission, which started it all more than 50 years ago now, was the starting point. But after that, he went on and on and on and contributed to a number of international commissions on sustainability during his work in the United Nations and post his work in the United Nations. But in the last several years, he has emerged as one of the leading, that word is somehow not always, doesn't always signify what it is supposed to mean, but as one of the leading public intellectuals in India through his writings on diverse economic issues, on the diverse economic policy issues, and the columns of the Business Standard have already been talked about. And he touches every single issue very fearlessly, very, very objectively and very fearlessly, giving us a range of policy options that we need to consider. You saw glimpses of that in the lecture today, where he talked about the changing nature of the international regime and what it really means in general to trade and to various other parameters in international investment, to trade and so on and so forth. But during the course of depicting that, he also pointed out the challenges which the Indian economy has faced in recent years, including declining public sector investment, the low R&D, problems in agriculture, where a lot of focus has been on the MSP of rice and wheat, and we've not really been, despite effort, has not really been able to go beyond that. I think these are very, very important signal problems, and he focused on two major areas: manufacturing, of course, where I think the general point that he made is a very important one, that the government, instead of creating a business-friendly environment, has actually focused on creating a conglomerate-friendly environment. But I think the question which one needs to ask, and this is a question which confronts or which faces not only government, but also which faces the academia who's here, who's part of the policy debate, is why is it this stasis in a world where rapid changes are taking place, and the government should have responded to these rapid changes with the same kind of speed that these changes deserve? Why is it that over the last few years we have faced a kind of stasis? And one of the reasons, I think, which I would lead to this thing, is that basically the circle of policy debate has shrunk in India, has shrunk remarkably in India. If you look at the heady period from the first plan to the fifth plan, I would say, to nearly the fifth plan at least, but going beyond that also to some extent, you find that there were strong public policy debates which took place on every issue, on the nature of the state, the intermediate regime, nature of agriculture, cooperation, land reforms, what have you. And it was through these policy debates that took place that the government of India and the polity formulated its own policies. So there was a shelf of policy options before the government of the day, and that enabled the government of the day to formulate relevant policy options. Where do we see that today? And what is the nature of the change that has taken place? Many of the challenges which Professor Nitin Desai have talked about today, as he pointed out, are not challenges which were restricted to the war, to the recent war in the Middle East. There have been challenges which have been confronting the Indian economy for several years. The declining share of private investment, the inability of private investment to rise to the occasion, the question of the relationship with the government and the conglomerates, the extent to which the small and micro sector, for example, which has a lot of space in the Indian economy, has been ignored, or in fact the space allotted to them has been compressed. If you look at the actual credit share of credit, and if you look at actual indicators, so all these have been there for some years now. They are not something which have arisen during the course, but at the same time, in the government policy circles, there was this tremendous obsession about India becoming the third largest economy, very soon the second largest economy, our rate of growth being among the highest among the emerging economies, regardless of where we stood in terms of per capita income or in terms of other poverty indicators, deprivation indicators. This was really the discourse. And then one bright day, in a couple of speeches, one of which was referred to by Nitin Bhai, the Prime Minister himself referred to a series of challenges emanating from the recent crisis and talked about restraint. And the moment he talked about restraint in the crisis, we had the same bevy of economists, in the policy circles of the government, then suddenly seize upon the question of crisis. The crisis became and the same economists, members of, of circles, policy circles, very close to the Prime Minister, writing about the nature of the crisis, what needed to be done, what the gold control order would do, and so on and so forth. And we have all been reading the newspapers, and we find a distinct difference now in the kind of discourse which is happening in the country. But even the present discourse that is happening within the country is from a very, very narrow standpoint of view. And this has been the case for quite some time. And the reason for this is because policy options have not been debated adequately. Think of manufacturing. The two fundamental changes that have taken place in manufacturing policy over the last decade have been Make in India and PLI. Now, who amongst us can tell us what the genesis of Make in India or PLI was? How seriously were they discussed as policy options within government? The PLI, the conglomerate thing, I think there was a kind of a hidden admiration in certain circles, policy circles close to the government, of the Korean model, of you supporting, big conglomerates and building on them. So somewhere along the line, the PLI came from that kind of thinking. But was there any sustained debate? And it was only when people like Arvind Subramaniam, who was himself a policy, in the policy circles of the government till one point of time, he pointed out that PLI, and Raghuram Rajan also pointed out that the PLI actually, the import content of some of the sectors which the PLI was talking about as a success were extraordinarily high. So the PLI didn't actually meant much value addition. It was at that time, only at that time, that the chief economic advisor of the government of India came up with a couple of articles justifying PLI and arguing that the PLI would become a kind of would open up the opportunities before other sectors. And we know since then that has not happened. That has still not happened, The sectors where it has happened are sectors where the conglomerates, foreign conglomerates, saw the opportunity. Like for example, Apple and various others saw the opportunity in a particular sector and seized upon PLI and made India a manufacturing hub. But it had very little to do with domestic policy, imperatives. So I think the two things which I think I would simply, also add to Nitin Bhai's description, and he's really been through a whole list of them, which I don't. One is that what really disturbs me and concerns me is the shrinking space for policy debates in India. And also what underlies behind these shrinking debates is the question of information and data. The question of information and data, whether it is a question of, for example, the debates which took place around employment, where people within government, within Niti Aayog, could not differentiate between gross and net employment. And the figures of Uber drivers and so on were being quoted as being contributing to additional employment in the country at a time when data was showing that net employment in India was not expanding at all. you know, and unemployment rates in many of the segments was very high. So you had the situation where, you know, narratives were replacing the question of analysis of hard data, which you and I, who work in, you know, with data, and we work with policy circles, we are prone to do. And unless we have authentic data, and unless that authentic data is put to good use, we cannot inform policy debates. So there is also this question that the information is in a sense prior to having relevant policies. And where we have been failing over the last several years is that data and information, you know, has not been coming through in the way that was the case earlier. You know, many of us who are researching in various sectors are now encountering all kinds of obstacles when we go out and collect government data, you know, public data. And that public data should be publicly available because it's been collected at government cost, at the cost of the public exchequer. And yet that data is denied. So if that data is denied, then the debate which can be built on that data also ceases to take place. And if the debate does not take place, it does not inform policy. So my own sense is, Nitin bhai, that one of the reasons why we've had policy stasis now for some years is that the kind of active policy debates that took place in India at one point of time, which some of you have participated in and others amongst us have read about, no longer happen. And we are getting more and more caught with narratives rather than debates. So this is something I believe we should worry about. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it was a very rich lecture. And thanks, Niti, Tavishi, and everybody else for bringing this together here and allowing us to remember the issues which Professor Yoginder Alagh was so concerned with. Thank you so much.
Now we can invite a couple of questions if some.
I would just like to add one thing, you know, that we have crony capitalism and growing oligopolies and monopolies in the economy. And they have, as you said very well, that politicizing the economy. That means political decisions are taken by these people. We had MRTV earlier, which is gone. Competition Commission is not functioning at all. So because of this, there are a large number of consequences on MSMEs and so many other things, you know, apart from other consequences. So that factor also is very important, that we have monopolies growing in the economy and without any obstacle at all, so to say.
Myself, Professor Param Sivam from Nirma University. Okay, sir. Good evening, sir. I am Professor Param Sivam from Nirma University, Ahmedabad. And some of the policy insights you have spoken are highly appreciated. Sir, I have a question whether the current government for the last 12 years touched many things but achieved nothing. They have created a mess whereby the haves and have-nots, the gap between haves and have-nots increased, and inequality increased largely. Probably one of the reasons is we have created a situation of too much financialization, wherein high-skilled, high-paid, and low-skilled, low-paid, the gap has widened, and because of that, the inequality has widened. And please kindly tell us how government should address it, because at this rate, if inequality goes up, then possibly there will be a civil war. If not now, at least at a distance, at least in next couple of years, because the inequality has widened like anything. How India should address the issue of inequality and crony capitalism, as Madam said. Can you please tell us? Thank you.
One more question there, and then we
Well, sir, you said that manufacturing growth is not satisfactory and employment in that manufacturing sector is also not satisfactory. And R&D expenditure that has been found to be the culprit, and you compared between China and India. In China, private sector participation as far as R&D investment is concerned, that is 75%, and in India it is only 30%. So, what is the main thing behind this? R&D expenditure is very risky expenditure. It might yield some return, might not. So what is the case in China that has been successful in terms of participation of the private sector, and in India it is not? So what attributes to this?
No, can I say that what you had said about is not a question but a comment which I fully agree with. The two questions which have come, one on the inequality side, and the other question that you have raised on how do we understand. I think it is worth looking. I had a slightly close. I didn't mention this, but I did have a closer look at the China thing. China thing is not a simple one, as simple as one would think. I believe that the reason for the success in China is it had new entrepreneurs. It did not have an inherited history of conglomerates to worry about. It had public sector companies. And the government of China did support public sector companies, but they did not rely on the public sector companies for manufacturing expansion. For the manufacturing expansion, it was mainly a lot of young technicians who had come up and who moved ahead and moved ahead fast. There are other reasons why, the fact that the government manipulated its exchange rate policy so that manufacturing would be attractive, etc., subsidies they give. There are many reasons for this, but my belief is that in India, what we have to understand is there is potential for fast growth because we do have. The one strength India does have is the number of qualified technicians we have. You look at the fact that 20% of the chip design development takes place in India, mostly in the South India, but it does take place in India. Look at the number of companies who are setting up GCC, what we call, the companies abroad who are setting up their in-house requirement plan things for technological development here. So I would say that one of our strengths is we do have people who have the capacity to become good entrepreneurs and grow. But you must move away from supporting established, mostly family-owned conglomerates into something which is much wider. Don't stop the conglomerates. Let them, they're big enough, they'll be able to survive and do well on their own. You don't have to, I'm not asking you to do that. But focus your support system much more strongly on this. Make it more market-oriented rather than business. As somebody said, it is not just business, it is becoming conglomerate-oriented. But move it away from that. That's why. On the inequality is a much more difficult problem. One of the problems is that because of a heavy transition towards an open capitalist system, you are not going to solve the inequality problem very quickly. And one point I should have mentioned and should not, is the interstate differentials. Look at the difference you have between the South India part and North India part. In fact, 90% of the increase in people of working age between now and 2050 is going to be in North India. In fact, in South India, it's going the opposite. You know, Andhra Pradesh launched the thing where they're giving 30,000 rupees for a third child and 40,000 for a fourth child as a gift. So I'd say that the South is very different. And the West also is getting stabilized. So is East. So I would say that in many ways, one of the other advantages of manufacturing is you will be creating blue-collar jobs, not just jobs for trained engineers and so on. That may make it a little more, reduce the thing. But I would expect that in an open, capitalist-oriented economy, direct solving of inequality is not going to be easy. It will be difficult. But I believe by manufacturing will lead to some degree of change because you're creating jobs for people who are not necessarily engineers, who are just skilled workers. You know? And that is one thing that may happen if we are. This is what happened in China. China's whole transition from rural labor was to manufacturing. You know? That is where the big transition of people took place. So manufacturing can perhaps help in trying to address some dimension of inequality, but not all.
Yeah, is there any other question? Yes, comment. You take. Hello.
Thank you. This was a comment rather. We had dinner at Yogi's house. You call him Yoginder, we call him Yogi here. And Montek had come down from Delhi. And one of the things that Yogi had mentioned during that dinner was that one thing that I would like to do before I die is to revisit the poverty line research. He specifically did it. What exactly is the situation on that? Was he able to work on it? Or did he give some directions? Or is it happening anyway? And is anyone taking this kind of work forward in that respect?
Basically on poverty these days, the focus has been moved to multidimensional. Most of the numbers that you see on poverty now are multidimensional. That's what Niti Aayog is producing. They're moving away from the old system. But you're absolutely right that Yogi did actually argue, saying that what I had approved was not enough now. It has to be reworked. But I don't think he actually reworked it. But today, it's being used with this, I think, I forget how many, there's sort of 8 or 10 different dimensions are there. And they, 12 dimensions, no? So they're mostly using this multidimensional index.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the central or one of the major problem is the employability and deployability of our youth. So capacity building is something which is so essential. On one hand, we have unemployment or underemployment, and on the other hand, we do not have enough people to work. I'm from industry background, so I know that in many projects are suffering because we do not have adequate technical manpower, which is a fundamentally it puzzles people how it can happen. So I think we as a society have not done enough over the years in building up the capacity and building up the education system which can produce the employable and deployable youth. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I did not mention it, but this is another big difference between India and China. China today has 3 industries which are in the top 10 in the world. We have none. Three universities which are in the top 10 in the world. They did a great deal of work in upgrading the quality of education, particularly at the high school and the university level. And they today have universities which are rated amongst the top. I'm surprised that I have more requests from universities in China to talk than from any university in India. I think the Indian universities have become very weak, and they're also not that huge a contribution to research. But you are absolutely right that if we really want to succeed, one of the big things we have to address is the quality of our education. Our problem now is not enrollment, numbers enrolled, etc. Our issue is the quality of the education that we're giving, and the differentiation of education between some of the private schools and some of the public schools is widening. And I have no easy answer to this, but this is a state level thing.
But
This is not a national.
is it because it's in a concurrent it is in concurrent list, no? Education. So it is neither
but
state.
The reality is most of the universities are state supported, not central supported. There are a handful of central universities, but most of the universities are state supported, including many private ones. No? So I'd say that you are totally right. This is one area where we need very strong, quick improvement. You have been seeing, I'm sure, the survey which is being done by this Bangalore Institute, Pratham, what is it called? Forget. Pratham, no? Pratham's, and you see that look at the standard. They ask whether somebody who is in class 5 can read what is being taught in class 2. And then they say, oh, it has gone up to 40% or 45%. But this is ridiculous. So the standard we are setting in our education is absolutely, I completely agree with you, that without this, we will not succeed in what I was talking about, manufacturing developing faster. China did it.
And unfortunately, it is not getting the attention it deserves, isn't it?
I hope, I know, you're right.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. I think,
Ravi, I just wanted to flag one issue. Your enthusiasm about manufacturing sector employment. But if you factor that recent changes in AI and the impact of AI or those technologies is going to be massive. It's already started showing up in banking, already started showing up in several sectors. Robotics is not so threatening as much as this AI thing is threatening. So what is your take on the impact of AI on jobs?
I think we'll take one last question and then, yes.
I'm Samir. I have a question on actually discourse on policies, government policies you have mentioned here. So is it that you are saying that's not thinking, discussion on policies and all? Is it that people are not interested into it, or some sort of pressure is there? Is it that a boss is there who's watching, okay, discussing policies, government policy? I have that question, sir.
Your question.
Question on debate on policy, government policies. It's shrinking, sir has said. Sir. So I am saying, is there some pressure on the academic community, okay, on discussing policies, government policies and all? Or is that government policies are not being criticized also? You heard that some people are very afraid to discuss also, not to talk, okay? Government are coming with policies, people do not discuss it because there may be some pressure from the government sides, okay? Is this because of that, or people are not interested at all to discuss common policies and programs, kind of things?
I think on your question on AI, if you see the assessments which are done, most of the AI impact will be on white-collar jobs, not blue-collar jobs. The blue-collar jobs would be affected by robots, etc. Yes, that's an older thing that has been happening. But I would say that AI, for the manufacturing thing, is not going to be as seriously affected by AI as the services sector is going to be. Because the services sector is much more where you're going to get a replacement of people in banks, etc., by AI. But AI impact is going to be more on the services sector rather than on the manufacturing sector. But it's still very early. Still very early. The impact, if it comes, will come decades from now. but will be mostly on the most of the numbers that you see talk about people on the manufacturing sector. On his question, I think he's referring to what you were mentioning.
No, I think it's your thing to answer. But you see, there's a very complex relationship between policy advocacy at our level, as the level of academics, making policy imperatives, talking about them, and the government of the day responding to them, listening to them. Now, if that relationship becomes very weak for some reason, for any reason, if the governments of the day are not responsive to policy discussions, or if they start taking policies, policy decisions, regardless of where the debates are, there is very little that can be done about it. Because ultimately it is the government of the day that takes these policy decisions. And you can see this not only in India's case, you can see this in many other places, many other countries, where the countries have moved from one side, where oscillated from one side, where policy discussions were important and became part of. In fact, in many countries, they became a part of the assessment of work in the universities. The extent to which policy debates were being encouraged, or do this thing, and now the reverse is happening. That these debates are being totally sidelined, ignored, and this is the government of the day. So it's a two-way relationship. The question of fear and so on, it has to do with the wider set of incentives which is there for people to freely debate. And that's an important question in itself.
First, I think I will invite my colleague to propose a vote of thanks.
This is the first Professor Y.K. Alagh Memorial Lecture. In SPI, Professor Alagh was in our heart, and he will be in our heart in the future as well. Shri Nitin Desai sir, we are extremely grateful to you that you have accepted our request and come to Ahmedabad to give the first Y.K. Alagh Memorial Lecture. On this occasion, it is our privilege that we got a chance to listen to the scholarly discourse regarding new policy priorities you have just delivered here, sir. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Ravi Srivastava for kindly coming and presiding over the program and giving a very pertinent add-on to the memorial lecture. We are grateful to several eminent scholars for kindly attending the program. I am thankful to all family members of late Professor Y.K. Alagh for being here today amongst us and for taking lots of initiatives, especially Ms. Tavishi Alagh. I would like to thank Professor Niti Mehta, Director of the Institute, for successfully leading the team to organize the program. I thank all my faculty colleagues for their support, especially to Dr. Munish Alagh and to Dr. Vachaspati Shukla for putting in a lot of efforts. I thank the entire staff community of SPIESR, Mr. Rajivan Nayar, Mr. Mukesh Bhai, Ms. Reena, Ms. Kajal, Mr. Umesh, Ms. Sarita, Mr. Pradeep, and all others. Finally, I extend my thanks to the entire audience who kindly came here today to listen to this lecture. Last but not the least, my final words of gratitude go to the ICSSR and Government of Gujarat for their financial support, without which this program would not have been possible. Thank you all.
I would like to invite the members of the audience for a cup of tea and some snacks which have been served outside.